Thanks so much. It's a delight to be here. I'm really glad that we have this opportunity to gather. And I will start with an apology to Max, who got a meandering paper very late. So I am confident he will make me look better than I should, and I am deeply appreciative of that from the outset. The paper really aims to do two things. The first aspect of the paper is really about thinking about the structure of digital theology as a distinctive form of constructive theology. And so it tries to situate reflections on that in light of the categories that I use most often as a theologian, thinking in terms of a correlational theology and thinking in terms of the ontological significance of phenomenological reflections. I mentioned that at the outset because the idea is that this is a proof of concept, and you could apply any set of ontological categories in any structure of constructive theology, put them in conversation with one another, and I hope some of the questions that get provoked, particularly at the beginning and the end of the paper, would shape the way that that occurs. The other aim for me in writing the paper was to think very explicitly about the ways in which digital technologies supervene on analogical properties, which is specifically to think about the ways in which the digital is an infrastructural technology. So in essence, this came to me as I was reflecting on an experience of a student conduct situation. And the other side of my job that I do when I don't get to teach, I'm dealing with the inane things that US college students do. And in one of these cases, it was dealing with speech that was online and the ways in which that speech could or could not disrupt the physical community. What was fascinating to me as I was dealing with this case over the course of the past year was really that as soon as the speech was removed, and it could be forgotten in some ways, the way in which various participants and actors in the particular situation engaged with one another changed. And that was what got me thinking about this way in which it's all too easy to forget in the midst of the ways in which digital technologies facilitate new communications and new properties, that they are reliant on a certain analogical set of infrastructures that must be present in order for them to work the way that they do. So keeping that in mind, what I was really interested in and remain interested in is this disjuncture, this sort of distinctive way in which digital phenomena can or can't open new and emergent ways of being in the world. And what I'm interested in are those distinctive moments for digital experiences, not where digital experiences are enhancing or extending something that can already be well described in terms of various analogical counterparts, but places where a new approach to the way in which things take on ontological categories is opened by particular organizations of preceding levels or preceding dimensions of the way we experience the world. A way of thinking about that, and the way that I usually work with it with students, is to talk about this sort of classic distinction that we make between a change in kind and a change in degree. So when I'm thinking about digital theology and I'm thinking about the direction that digital theology goes, what I'm particularly interested in are changes in kind, not necessarily the ways in which digital experiences enhance or diminish various degrees of otherwise analogical experiences. Outlining those questions to me is very interesting for digital theology because I believe that very importantly for an emergent form of constructive theology, articulating the ways in which the digital experiences that we describe are or are not consistent with the analogical counterparts that underpin them will be essential to making clarity for any sort of systematic or constructive claims going forward. That's at the outset what I want the paper to do. The rest of the paper that deals with things like the flesh, wonder, the uncanny, the neighbor, the experience of forgiveness is really the goal is to be proof of concept for these wider methodological questions that I hope underpin the ways in which digital theology sets itself up as a field going forward. So the experiment in the paper, which is really the second part of it in a lot of ways, works with categories that were simply familiar and helpful to me. I use the phenomenological notion of the flesh as a way of articulating a flexible ontology, looking at the ways in which various technologies intersect with and are incorporated to bodies. The suggestion that I want to make is that digital flesh could be a distinctive category, that the ways in which digital technologies incorporate to the body are so distinctive as not to be reducible in every instance to the ways in which other more physical and tactile technologies are introduced and incorporated to the body. I use the notion of wonder and the notion of the uncanny as phenomenological feelings that accompany experiences and indicate a place where this sort of ontological discrepancy may exist, which is to say, in those moments where we take on some aspect of the digital into our flesh and we experience something alienating or disorienting, those are the sorts of experiences that I think we need to pay attention to most in constructing a digital theology. And last but not least is then to look at this notion of forgiveness. And I use Kierkegaard's notion of forgiveness as a place to begin, just because it's classic and kind of easy. I think it's a little bit easier to get a hold of. There are some very clear categories that he uses. But for Kierkegaard, right, forgiveness really entails two moments that are inverse to one another, one of remembering and one of forgetting. And what I suggest at the end of the paper is that the way that he figures forgiveness relies on a certain way of spatially, temporally, and causally being in the world that doesn't apply well in every digital context. And if it doesn't apply well, then one, we probably shouldn't use Kierkegaard for digital accounts of forgiveness. But two, I think more interestingly, what it opens up is a question of, are there any accounts of Christian forgiveness that sufficiently deal with the ways, particularly the temporal notions of digital flesh, don't line up with the physical ways of being with each other as the temporal experiences of physically being with one another. That, to me, is interesting because it opens a place for a constructive digital theology that looks different, that requires a different account of forgiveness than we might otherwise use when we're physically together. That's the sort of broad overview of the paper. No one ever complains when you're a little short instead of long, so I hope that will be okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. I was just going to give you the 2 minutes notice, so you're perfect. And then I welcome Max Thornton. Max?
Thank you, Fritz. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, organizers. I realize I need to update my biographical information because I just graduated from my doctoral program, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, I thought this paper was great. I had like a million thoughts in response to it, but I tried to keep it down because this is only a short response. So I will try not to go on for too long, but I do have plenty more to say about it. So Pryor has given us a rich and evocative proposal for how to do digital theology. As if I may quote your introductory paragraphs, you're suggesting, quote, that the most interesting forms of a digital theology emerge where digital technologies change the way we experience space, time, causality, and substance, creating a distinct set of lived experiences in a digital dimension, irreducible to our everyday experience of these ontological categories. Analyzing technology through the phenomenological category of flesh, he describes the disorientation of these changed experiences as producing a sense of wonder or the uncanny, which demands a theological response adequate to the profound nature of the change. So how does our fleshly engagement with digital technologies produce such a disorienting sense of wonder? Pryor uses the example of the bicycle to vividly illustrate his phenomenological account of flesh and technology, describing the fluidity of sensing and being sensed, and the shifting horizons of differentiation between self and the world. At times, he feels the distinction lying between his own body and the bike. At other times, the distinction relocates to differentiate between the bike body, as he calls it, and the world. This is a beautifully clear demonstration of the dynamic entanglements that constitute our being in the world, and one answer to the question Jane Bennett poses in her book, Vibrant Matter. How can I start to feel myself as not only human? That is, we are all always already not only human, but materially intertwined with all that surrounds us. So how do we start to feel, to experience this truth? And how do we begin to feel our digital entanglement in the flesh so that we might theologize from it? Since for Pryor, digital theology must jump off from these moments of disorientation when the everyday becomes strange to us through our enfleshed experience of the digital. And yet, I have to ask, what exactly makes digital technologies qualitatively different or different in kind from other technologies? You use the decidedly non-digital technology of the bicycle to demonstrate the phenomenological interactions of the flesh, the way that my body does not end at the skin, but rather continuously remaps its boundaries to take up additional material and incorporate that material within its realm of experience. And I wish for more details about why the digital is so different. You have that citation of the John Durham Peters account of technological infrastructure. So it's infrastructure when it facilitates access to a depth of meaning while making the technology itself seem to disappear from our experience, if I understood that correctly. But again, doesn't this disappearance happen with any technology once we get sufficiently accustomed to it? Thinking of the highway hypnosis of the long haul driver, or even the way I can get so absorbed in reading a book that I don't even hear my name being called. So is it only the massive proliferation of digital technology that makes it meaningfully different from analog technologies? You have that brief discussion of Zwift, the app with different virtual surroundings for stationary indoor bikes, but concluding that it's just a facsimile of real life experience. And I guess I kind of wanted more details about exactly why. And it did seem to me we had kind of a chopped off sentence, and I wondered if something kind of got eaten by the computer at that point that might have given us more information. But I also wonder about what might happen with a less immersive use of digital technology. For instance, an outdoor cyclist wearing an electronic fitness tracker, which may indeed intervene profoundly in her experience of time, space, and embodiment. Where does that fit in here? You have the suggestion that we need a, quote, typology of digital lived experiences that separate formation of the digital flesh into those that produce truly novel cosmic encounters with the world and digital facsimiles of real world experiences. But I wonder if it's really possible to make a definitive distinction between digital experiences of true novelty and those that are mere facsimiles. Even if I personally experience a given digital technology as merely a facsimile, can I universalize that experience, particularly when the facsimile may make certain experiences newly available to people who, because of disability, poverty, other material circumstances like a pandemic, they may never have the chance to have the real world experience. Furthermore, as we are increasingly recognizing that online is real life, does distinguishing between the truly novel digital experience and the digitized facsimile risk perpetuating and reifying an oversimplified dualism that reads the virtual as less material and less real, which I think is the opposite of what you're trying to do here. The point of this phenomenological account of enfleshed engagement with digital technologies is that such technologies are not less material, real, or fleshly, but differently material, real, and fleshly. So these are just some of the questions I was hoping to provoke further clarity and deeper engagement with this exciting proposal, which I think gives us a powerful way to think about doing theology of the literally digital, the meeting place of the finger and the electronic device. Thank you.